When Jake Marshall returned to his Wyoming ranch, he discovered strangers living on his land, and a rental agreement he never approved. An audacious betrayal by the HOA. Karen Whitmore, the manipulative HOA president, had exploited her position to profit from his property, flaunting rules and trust with a chilling confidence. But Jake uncovered a legal loophole, teamed up with the relentless lawyer Emily Rogers, and meticulously documented every violation to reclaim what was his. And just wait to see how this tense battle unfolded in court, and how justice was finally restored to Jake and his beloved ranch. Jake Marshall had always believed in doing things the right way. For years, he had poured sweat, blood, and uncountable hours into his sprawling Wyoming ranch, carving a life from open plains and rolling hills. The ranch wasn't just property. It was his sanctuary, a testament to decades of dedication, inherited know-how, and dreams that had taken root in the red clay of the West. So when an unexpected work opportunity in Denver came up, a 2-month consulting contract that promised a substantial boost to his savings, he felt torn but confident. He entrusted the ranch to the local homeowners association, the HOA, thinking that their oversight would be sufficient. After all, they had policies in place, meetings, bylaws, all designed in theory to protect property owners. 2 months passed, and Jake counted down the days. He imagined returning to the familiar creak of the barn doors, the scent of hay in the early morning, and the quiet hum of the cattle grazing. He pictured the ranch as he had left it. Orderly fences, untouched pastures, and the freedom of space that made every hardship worthwhile. But reality had a different plan. The moment Jake's truck turned onto the gravel driveway, a pit formed in his stomach. The for sale signs he had posted before leaving were gone. In their place, he saw unfamiliar vehicles parked along the edge of the property. Figures moved in the distance, voices carrying across the wind like a discordant note in a symphony he knew by heart. His pulse quickened as he approached the main house. Through the windows, he could see strangers milling about, families who didn't belong here, making themselves at home in a place that was not theirs. Jake's eyes scanned the ranch office, the site where HOA records were kept. That's when the blow hit. A neatly filed rental agreement, stamped and signed, bore the name Karen Whitmore, the HOA president. It stated clearly that his property had been leased to tenants he had never met, never approved, and never wanted. Profit from his land had been redirected, turned into someone else's gain without his consent. His chest tightened. The words blurred for a moment. Disbelief struggled with rising anger. Karen Whitmore. Jake had met her only a few times at HOA gatherings, but her reputation preceded her. She was meticulous, persuasive, and possessed an uncanny ability to bend rules without technically breaking them. Many neighbors whispered about her tendency to take liberties with HOA authority. Yet Jake had never imagined she would cross the line into outright exploitation of his property. He stepped out of the truck, fists clenched as a sense of outrage bubbled through him. The audacity, the sheer gall of Karen struck at him like a physical blow. How could someone in a position of trust take advantage so brazenly? He felt a tidal wave of frustration, each thought spiraling into another. The trust he had placed in the HOA, the hours spent preparing the ranch for visitors and potential buyers, the careful balance he had maintained to protect both livestock and property value. Every effort now seemed undermined. Jake's eyes swept over the fields. The fences looked intact at first glance, but the footprints, tire tracks, and scattered belongings hinted at disturbance. Even the air of the ranch felt changed, tinged with an unwelcome energy he couldn't ignore. It was as if the property itself had sensed the injustice, each corner whispering that it had been violated. He felt a mixture of shock and fury. Anger flared, not just at the intrusion but at the betrayal of a system he had trusted. How could an organization created to safeguard owners' interests instead become a vehicle for someone else's personal gain? Every principle Jake believed in seemed tainted, every assumption about fairness questioned. He wanted answers, he wanted accountability, and above all he wanted his ranch back on his terms, intact and respected. But first he had to face the immediate reality. Karen Whitmore had taken liberties with his home, his livelihood, and his trust. The injustice wasn't subtle, it was glaring, blatant, and undeniable. And in that moment, standing in the late afternoon sun with the wind stirring the prairie grass around him, Jake Marshall felt the kind of anger that could ignite a fire that wouldn't just burn off frustration, but would demand action, confrontation, and ultimately justice. Jake Marshall had expected resistance from Karen Whitmore. He knew she had a reputation for manipulation and bending rules to her advantage. But he hadn't anticipated the sheer audacity of her dismissal. He started with phone calls. Each time her voice on the other end carried the same polished, unconcerned tone, laced with subtle mockery. "Jake, everything is fine. The HOA followed proper procedure, no worries," she had said during one particularly infuriating call. It was her smirk that gnawed at him more than the words, a quiet, confident smirk that said she knew she had him trapped. When calls failed, Jake turned to emails, carefully documenting every complaint and request for restitution. Hours of drafting, redrafting, attaching photos of the property, and citing HOA bylaws felt like pouring effort into a void. Her replies were brief, dismissive, or simply absent. Some contained vague legal jargon, sentences meant to confuse rather than clarify. It was as if she was playing a game and Jake was forced into the role of a frustrated observer, powerless to make progress. He even confronted her during the next HOA meeting. Standing in a crowded room of neighbors, all eyes half curious and half wary, he demanded answers. "Karen, These renters weren't authorized. The property is mine and you don't have the right to lease it." His voice shook, part from anger, part from exhaustion. Karen smiled, not the friendly, neighborly kind of smile, but a slow, calculating smile that made his stomach turn. "Jake," she said, drawing out his name as though savoring it. The HOA acted in the community's best interest. "Everything is according to policy." Her words were carefully chosen to imply reason, yet carried no accountability. As days turned into weeks, the problem deepened. Jake discovered minor damages around the ranch, scratches on the barn doors, a broken fence post, scuff marks in the living quarters, all caused by the renters who had wandered freely. When he reported these, the HOA shrugged, claiming that such issues were covered under their management. Their vague assurances offered no real compensation or repair plan. The implication was clear. He had little recourse, and the organization he had trusted was shielding Karen's actions. Each night, Jake's frustration transformed into restless insomnia. He lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction, every missed opportunity to prevent this disaster. His mind raced with what-ifs and if-onlys. He could see the faces of the strangers in his fields, hear their voices where there should have been only the quiet hum of the prairie. The ranch, once a haven of open space and freedom, now felt like a cage, walls invisible but insurmountable, holding him hostage in his own home. The betrayal cut deep. Jake had relied on systems and people designed to maintain fairness, but they had failed him spectacularly. Karen's casual dismissal of his rights, her manipulation of the HOA, and the reckless behavior of the renters had left him grappling with a sense of helplessness. Every fence post, every blade of grass, every familiar corner of the ranch seemed tainted with the memory of intrusion. As the pain settled in, Jake felt it on multiple levels: emotional, practical, even existential. He had invested years of effort into building a life grounded in honesty, hard work, and stewardship of the land. And yet those principles seemed powerless against one person's greed and arrogance. His connection to the ranch, the pride and comfort it had given him, felt severed, replaced by a gnawing sense of loss. He began to understand that this wasn't just about property. It was about trust, about the belief that rules, organizations, and agreements existed to protect, not exploit. Each failed attempt at resolution reminded him of the fragility of that trust, the ease with which it could be shattered. And with that realization came despair, a quiet, lingering ache that made even the simplest tasks feel overwhelming. Jake wandered the property at dawn, trying to reclaim some semblance of peace. The sun rising over the prairie offered little comfort. The wind carried echoes of voices that didn't belong, and the familiar sights of barns, corrals, and pastures were shadowed by a sense of violation. The ranch he had loved, The place that had defined him now weighed on him with the gravity of disappointment. In that period of pain, the spark of anger that had flared upon his return slowly twisted into a deeper, more personal anguish. The injustice was no longer an abstract idea. It was tangible, experienced in every corner of his life. Every unanswered call, every dismissive email, every smirk from Karen amplified the sense of helplessness. Jake Marshall, a man who had once felt unstoppable on his own land, found himself trapped in a cycle of frustration and sorrow, searching for a way forward that seemed, for now, just out of reach. Jake Marshall had spent sleepless nights replaying every interaction with Karen Whitmore and the HOA, feeling the weight of betrayal pressing down on him. The ranch, his sanctuary, had become a reminder of helplessness and frustration. Yet in the middle of that despair, a spark appeared. Unexpected, quiet, but undeniably real. While scrolling through property statutes online, Jake stumbled upon a provision buried in Wyoming property law. Unauthorized rental of private property could be considered fraud, and the individuals responsible could be held personally liable. It wasn't a grand revelation, but it was enough. Enough to ignite a flicker of hope, where there had only been exhaustion and resignation. The discovery shifted something inside him. For the first time since returning to the ranch, Jake felt the possibility of action. This wasn't about wishful thinking, it was tangible, backed by law. He realized that the HOA, and Karen specifically, had crossed a line that left them exposed. If he could document the violations and present them in the right way, he might not only reclaim his ranch but also hold her accountable. The thought filled him with a cautious optimism, replacing the crushing weight of despair with something like resolve. Jake knew he couldn't face this alone. He needed someone who could translate legal intricacies into action. Someone fearless enough to confront a manipulative opponent like Karen. That's when he remembered Emily Rogers, a lawyer renowned for taking on impossible cases and winning. Known among property owners as a tenacious advocate, Emily had a reputation for leaving no detail unexamined and no loophole unexplored. Jake reached out to her, expecting polite skepticism at best. Instead, she listened, her eyes lighting up as he recounted the story of the unauthorized rentals, the damages, and the dismissive HOA. "We can make this right," Emily said, her voice calm but firm. "It will take time and meticulous work, but the law is on your side if we build a proper case." Her confidence was contagious. For the first time in weeks, Jake felt the weight on his chest lift, replaced by a sense of partnership and strategy. He wasn't just reacting anymore. He was planning, preparing, and moving toward resolution. The work began immediately. Jake and Emily walked the property together, cataloging every visible sign of misuse: scuffed floors, broken fence posts, signs of wear in the living quarters, and other minor damages that the HOA had dismissed. They photographed, recorded, and cataloged everything with painstaking attention to detail. Each snapshot of a fence post or a dent in the barn was no longer a reminder of helplessness. It was evidence, a step toward accountability. At the same time, they began digging into the HOA records, tracing every rental payment that Karen had received. Each transaction previously invisible was now a trail leading directly to her. Jake felt a sense of vindication with every document uncovered. It was no longer an abstract injustice. It was a concrete, provable pattern of exploitation. The hope that justice could be achieved grew with every new piece of evidence. Evenings that had once been dominated by frustration and insomnia were now filled with strategy sessions. Jake and Emily went over legal precedents, discussed courtroom tactics, and reviewed the documentation from multiple angles. The ranch, once a symbol of despair, became a headquarters for reclaiming what was rightfully his. Each meeting strengthened Jake's resolve. The injustice he had suffered fueled his determination. Not just to recover property, but to ensure that Karen's actions carried consequences. Hope, Jake realized, wasn't passive. It required action, precision, and courage. The fire that had smoldered beneath anger and despair began to blaze, a driving force pushing him forward. He envisioned the courtroom, the judge reviewing the evidence, and the eventual moment when fairness would prevail. The thought of standing up to Karen and finally taking control of his own destiny filled him with renewed energy. In that period of preparation and planning, Jake's perspective shifted. The ranch was no longer a place of loss. It was the battleground for justice. The glimmer of hope that had first appeared online transformed into a guiding light, illuminating a path toward recovery, accountability, and eventual triumph. For the first time in weeks, Jake Marshall allowed himself to believe that the story wasn't over, that the injustice he had endured could be confronted and corrected. And in that belief, he found the courage to keep moving forward. The courtroom was tense, buzzing with anticipation as Jake Marshall and Karen Whitmore faced off across the polished mahogany tables. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, glinting off the brass plaques and the neatly stacked legal documents, illuminating a scene that had been months in the making. Jake's heart pounded, not with fear but with a mix of determination and resolve. After weeks of meticulous preparation, the moment of reckoning had finally arrived. Karen appeared confident as ever, her carefully rehearsed charm in full display. She greeted the jury with a practiced smile, nodding politely, exuding the air of control she had maintained within the HOA for years. To any casual observer, she seemed poised, professional, and even reasonable. But Jake, guided by his lawyer Emily Rogers' relentless investigation, knew the truth. Behind the polished exterior was a manipulative opportunist who had exploited his trust and his property. Emily began presenting their evidence with precision. Each photograph of the scuffed barn walls, each document detailing unauthorized rental payments, and each record of HOA communications painted a clear, undeniable picture. Karen's attempts to frame her actions as procedural or in the community's best interest began to crumble under the weight of facts. The jury listened intently, their expressions shifting as the reality of her actions became increasingly clear. Every careful word Emily spoke chipped away at the image Karen had worked so hard to cultivate. Jake watched as the narrative unfolded, a mixture of relief and pride swelling inside him. He could see the impact of their hard work, the painstaking hours spent cataloging damages, tracing payments, and analyzing HOA bylaws, taking effect in real time. For months, despair and helplessness had clouded his mind, but now clarity and justice were emerging, tangible and near. Every unanswered call, every dismissive email, every sleepless night felt vindicated, finally contributing to a moment of reckoning. Karen's face gradually hardened. The smirk that had haunted Jake during the HOA meetings disappeared as Emily's precise arguments and irrefutable evidence left her with little room to maneuver. Witness testimony combined with clear documentation highlighted not only the unauthorized rentals but also the lack of oversight and accountability within the HOA, emphasizing Karen's direct responsibility. The courtroom, once a place of tension and uncertainty, became a stage for the restoration of fairness. When the judge delivered the verdict, the words seemed to resonate beyond the courtroom walls. Full ownership and all profits from the unauthorized rentals were returned to Jake. Karen was fined for her actions, and the HOA was ordered to implement strict oversight procedures to prevent future abuses. A wave of relief and satisfaction washed over Jake. The months of frustration, anger, and sleepless nights had culminated in justice served. He exhaled, feeling a burden lift from his shoulders. Walking across his restored ranch later that afternoon, Jake felt an overwhelming sense of vindication. The fences he had meticulously repaired, the pastures teeming with cattle, and the quiet hum of the land, all reaffirmed what he had fought so hard to reclaim. The anger that had ignited upon his return, the sleepless nights haunted by betrayal, and the crushing weight of helplessness had transformed into inspiration. He understood now that standing up for what was right, even against someone who seemed untouchable, could change the outcome entirely. News of Jake's victory spread through the community of property owners. Conversations turned to admiration for his persistence and courage, and his story became a cautionary tale about vigilance and advocacy. People began to see the power in standing up for themselves, in seeking justice even when systems seemed stacked against them. Jake's journey wasn't just about reclaiming a ranch. It became a testament to resilience, careful planning, and the belief that one determined individual could make a difference. As the sun set over the Wyoming plains, casting long shadows across the ranch, Jake felt an unexpected lightness in his chest. The fight had not only restored what was his, it had reaffirmed his faith in fairness, diligence, and the idea that justice, when pursued with courage and precision, could prevail. The land beneath his boots wasn't just earth and grass anymore. It was a symbol of perseverance, a beacon of hope, and an inspiration to anyone facing injustice. Standing there, looking out over the horizon, Jake Marshall realized that triumph was more than victory. It was the affirmation of one's principles, the reclaiming of trust, and the courage to fight even when the odds seemed insurmountable.